This video is a collection of ideas, processes, mindset kind of tricks in order to help you develop a music making mindset. So you see a white wall. It takes up your entire field of vision. If you approach it slowly, you're going to stop. You won't go anywhere. If you approach it with some speed, you fly. The metaphor is a snowboard jump. All right. I'm hoping that we can give you some ideas so that when you encounter something that looks like an obstacle, you can turn it into an opportunity and do something amazing. So creative technology creates some challenges and adds some value. One of the values of working with technology is that you can do things easier. It's easier to do a specific task with technology than it would have been to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm thinking of recording in particular. For example, if you were trying to record yourself singing in an old-fashioned recording studio, you'd have to rewind the tape, get to the cue you want to get to, press play, run into the sound booth, get the headphones on, close the sound booth door, and then record your take. And then at the end of the take, you'd have to run back out to the record deck and stop the recording so it doesn't record into like the next chunk of song. Because you might have several songs lined up on a tape to do all the vocal recordings, and you might be working on song 2, but there's already a relatively finished version of song 3. So you're running around doing things that are, today we kind of laugh thinking about the idea of like physically moving from point A to point B while recording. That's silly. But that's just the reality of how the technology used to work. Another value of technology is that we can make things better. We can make consistent output. A challenge with analog playback is that the resulting sound might not be super consistent. Or if we make a really cool sound, we might not be able to get that sound back because it had like a very awkward setting of knobs or something like this, something that we can't easily recall. Even if we wrote it all down on paper, we might not be able to get it back. Whereas digitally, bam, you've got a copy. You've got the saved presets, you've got the saved session, everything's there. So if you make it right once, you can make it right twice, and so on and so forth. The other thing about technology that, because it makes things easier, it makes us able to make better work and recall things and save things and not lose as much ideas. Like if we have a cool idea, we somehow capture it, we can open up new possibilities because now we ideally have more time to focus on new ideas, whereas before we spent a lot of time executing the idea we already had, running around between recording decks and all of these sorts of things. Now we have the ability to spend that time doing the creative stuff, creative sound design, creative song structures, these sorts of things. And also there's some things that just aren't possible without technology. The wonderful sounds of electronic music are not possible without a synthesizer, right? You just can't, I don't think you could go out there and get the sound of a bass drop in the real world. I think you could get pretty cool sounds that maybe you can use as a bass drop, but that would be quite the adventure to go out and find a sound that is a convincing, awesome bass drop with real noises. I record a lion and roar and a train passing. Sorry, I'm just thinking about weird things at this point. But to be able to do that right in your home studio without running around for a month with a field recorder is pretty awesome. So, I broke it down this way, didn't I? Curses of technology. It's easy to make things, therefore it's easy to make garbage. And once you have garbage, it's too easy to polish it. So you're thinking, oh, this is really great. It's really a fine-tuned production. It's a fine-tuned mix, but it's like a shitty song. Ugh. Right? One thing that kind of gets me personally with technology is that if I don't make committed decisions, if I leave everything in automation mode, for example, at any point in my production, I can go all the way back to square one with all of these details that don't need to be messed with at any, once you've written the lyrics, you don't need to change them every freaking take of your recording. That's the song. Those are the words. Let's record those words. If one or two words is not working, change it. Great. Yeah. But not every take. You don't go with the lights out, it's less dangerous. Well, it's like, is it dangerous or is it less vulnerable? Or is it, you don't second guess yourself 1,000 times. You just, you know, move forward, make progress. So, you know, is it easy to make garbage? Yes, but you can't make anything if you don't make something. There's actually a famous uh, uh, creative leader. I think is Edwin Catmull. I think is his name. He's the one of the founders and president of Pixar Animation and now Disney Animation. And one of the things that he often says is that you don't start with The Incredibles. You start with something that maybe 1% of what you start with might be what becomes The Incredibles. A lot of these ideas, especially in the pre-stages where like you're writing your ideas out. In the case of movies, like there's a lot of narrative stuff that gets worked on before you start production. And in his stories, he talks about how, wow, I mean, like characters that just didn't make sense and that they didn't create an emotional arc that was compelling, or they, it in musical terms, it'd be like if you have this incredible riser and this really big build up to a drop, but then in writing you kind of forgot that leads to a drop, and it would be satisfying to have a drop, and you just kind of lead to a new modulation to rises up, and now we're in a new key. Nothing other, no dynamics has changed. We're just in a new key with the same kind of sound palette. Um, as a writer, you might have to make decisions that get you, okay, this builds tension. I should relieve that tension here, or I should extend that tension and relieve it over here, right? That this needs to, if nothing exists, you can't make those decisions. You can't, if you have no tension and you have no release, you can't make it better. You can't make it more interesting. So you need to have something before you can polish something, is what I'm trying to get at. There's an old story of Aphex Twin making some finished work that he didn't really care for or wasn't really paying all that close attention to, and a courier came to pick up something that he had been commissioned to do, like pick up the audio recording, and Aphex Twin just grabs one of these finished products off his shelf that isn't the one they hired him to do, and just hands it to the courier. And he got paid for the gig because he had something that was passable. So you might find yourself producing a really polished piece, and you might think to yourself, I don't like this. There's something not right about it. Yada yada yada. Maybe, and give yourself the opportunity to find out if it's some sort of weird self-censorship or insecurity by putting it away. Let it sit for a while. Let it just park on the shelf. It's a finished thing. It's ready. You could be putting it on SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever distributor you want to go with these days. But if you're not liking it, maybe someday you realize it's good, or maybe you find out later it really isn't good, and that's where it belongs. It's on the shelf somewhere, not in the public view. And with all these possibilities, you really can be disciplined and make the thing happen that you want to have happen, and not allow the million distractions that are available to you get in your way. Just move on. Like, yeah, I could tweak that for another 2 days. Will it be better? I don't know, probably not. Make music. Don't make tweaks, right? Manifest the destiny that you want to pursue. So this is kind of a potpourri of wild ideas here. There are some ways to get out of a writer's block context where you're like, oh man, I'm stuck. I've got this great idea, and then you're just kind of getting in your own way, perhaps. Or maybe you just need to break out of your rut. Maybe you're doing the same thing. You're making all these great sounding songs, but they're just not very different. It really just sounds like I actually did a show once where I played 2 songs back to back in the same key at the same tempo. I don't know what I was thinking. I clearly wasn't thinking. I was thinking about other things. And someone I overheard someone saying at after, as I was walking off stage, I was like, why that guy just play a bunch of he just played the same song twice. I was like, oh yeah, same key, same tempo. That even though it's a very different song, for a lot of people that's going to sound exactly the same. So that was silly. I should have broken out of that rut, played a different tempo, played a different key at least, to make it interesting, especially when I had such a short set where I was really just playing 2 songs in a what do you call it, the thing where multiple people play very short sets. So some things you can use to break the block. AI and machine learning, we'll get a little bit more into that. Randomness, just arbitrary decisions, like what should be the next key for the section? I don't know, throw in something random. If it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, try something else. And by trying something else, maybe we could try something that makes sense in advance, not just a totally arbitrary key, but a key built on music theory. So it's like, well, starting from, we played a C, now we played an E, what's the next logical musical option? Okay, we could play an A, we could play something else, we could play a G, really mix things up in some way, right? We don't just like randomly play a B flat when we're playing a bunch of white notes. We don't just jump onto the black keys like randomly. We kind of make an informed decision about, we could use randomness to select what's next, but from what are we selecting from, right? Are we selecting just any pitch, or are we selecting from 2 or 3 pitches that would be cool, right? Another way to break the block is improvisation. Let's just play. Let's play. A lot of us have very deep and interesting musical intuitions, and if we put our ability to make sounds at our fingertips in some way so that we can like just do it live, that gives us an incredible opportunity to make expressive sounds that we can then, once we capture that expressive kind of gesture, if you will, now we can fine tune and go, oh, okay, I get the idea. I've made a drum fill by right? Like maybe it's a bunch of glitches, but it functionally feels like a drum fill. Why don't I edit a bunch of audio clips that I was triggering live, but I'm going to edit them now to have a nice rock steady performance. Another approach is alternate aesthetics. I'll go into a little bit more of that, but if you're working in one aesthetic all the time, you could get into a rut. I've done this a couple times where I was playing with really specific aesthetic spaces that I found myself getting frustrated because they didn't go anywhere fast enough. There's a style of music from like 20 years ago called like indie shoegazer style music, where it's like you're just playing, you're strumming consistently like eighth notes, and like very slowly over many bars, like 128, 256 bars, you build the energy up, and then just sustains there for a while and then fades out. And that aesthetic was there was certain fun to it. I mean, there's definitely a meditative, cool vibe to a certain aesthetic, but if you want to have like a explosive release that you get from EDM, working in that particular aesthetic might not work. Now, in contrast to that, you might find yourself finding too many predictable actions. So, go to another aesthetic to get something new to do, right? So you have a fresh outlook. Another thing is time constraints, and I think we'll go into more detail on time constraints. So like creating something in a small amount of time and hopefully accumulating all of those cool ideas. So let's dig into this machine learning. So there are a lot of things that machine learning can do and AI can do, but when I say AI, I mean like narrow AI, not like sentient machines taking over our creative abilities. We're way far away from that as far as I can tell. Like the research on AI is generally saying that we're decades at best away from general AI, and that assumes that we will continue to pursue that end, because it might just take too much computing power or too much energy or something like this, and it might not have good economic results, at least in the creative fields. We'll see, it might. But some narrow AI and machine listening tools can do music recommendations. So if you're listening to certain kind of aesthetics or certain kind of music and you were like, I want something that's like that, but a little bit different, there's recommendation engines that can help you get get to the edges of your aesthetic space, for example, in terms of recommendations. There's also things that machine listening can do in terms of, I hear that sound, there are several sounds that have a similar acoustic signature, and you can use that acoustic signature to replace sounds that you have with other sounds. I think Pro Tools and some other tools have something called Sound Replacer, where you're like, okay, I want all of the kick drum sounds that are recorded in this like wanky recording booth to be replaced with 808 kicks, because I'm working on a production that has more of that like bassy electronic kick sound. So I don't want my floppy kick drum sound in this recording. Highlight them all, automatically replace them, great. We can go even further and do things like, let me make a bunch of vocal noises into this thing and use Sound Replacer to try to get some really exciting sounds that are kind of like your vocal sounds, and see if you can get Sound Replacer to replace different components of the sound with your electronically selected sounds. There's some, Google has a tool called Magenta that they've actually ported to Max for Live. So you can do a bunch of cool things like AI generated music, AI continuated music. So, you have a short melody, you put it into the continuator, and it suggests what other melodies you could make to extend that melody. This might be great for things like, okay, I have the first 3 repetitions of a melodic theme, and I need to do, on the 4th repetition, I need it to be a little bit different. Well, you could be kind of stuck. Your music theory chops could be drawing a blank. You could just be frustrated with your current chops. Well, throw this tool in, see what happens, right? You get a crazy, like 2 crazy options and one that's passable. You're like, oh, that's cool. Now that it exists, the 4th repetition with a slight variation exists, you can go, oh, it'd be better if this note went up instead of down. And then you make some edits, and now suddenly you have something cool that builds on something that was originally yours, adds another, personality or another little bit of flavor, and then gets polished to fit back into your aesthetic. Boom, you're moving forward again. And the last one is mapping systems. Wekinator in particular allows you to do mapping in the machine teaches itself how to do the mapping. So one of the best examples that I've seen is the developer, Rebecca. She'll do things like, okay, I do this gesture, and I'm going to map it to one set of parameters over here. Save. She'll teach the system. She'll do the repetition. And then I'll do this gesture, this sort of like horizontal hand gesture, or maybe 2 horizontal hand gestures, and I'm going to map that to another set of parameters. And then what the computer does is it figures out everything in between this gesture and this gesture is a parameter space between the first preset and the second preset, and it adjusts the parameters accordingly. And this all happens automatically. You didn't have to like hardwire all those wild changes. So now you can do this gesture. It's like very much in between the two, and not linearly in between the two, but you can get some sort of response space that could be interesting. And also it saves you from spending a bunch of time doing max coding if you want. So randomness. This is where we can introduce arbitrary decision making into our musical process. This is especially great for getting out of a stuck space. It's great for getting out of all of my music sounds exactly the same to me. I need to get something fresh, something spicy. And my favorite collaborator is booked and not available today. Well, let's try something arbitrary. Let's if we're trying to choose a key of a song, let's get if you have any friends that play D&D, and get one of those 12-sided die, roll that. There's your key, right? Choose one of 12. Or if you have 2 6-sided die, you can scale that so that it's like, okay, double snake eyes, that's going to be C, and then like snake eyes and 2, that's going to be D, whatever your arbitrary choices are. But you're using the dice to give yourself a decision that isn't necessarily predetermined. So you can kind of like get out of your head for a second. Another way to do this is with a coin. You can do a binary tree. So that is, if I have 8 choices, I can arbitrarily use a coin to decide with 3 coin tosses. So I have 8 choices. So 4 and 4, heads is this side, tails is this side. Boom, I flip the coin, heads, whatever it is. Okay, now I'm making a choice between 4 or 2 and 2. Heads, tails. Flip it again, tails. Okay, I've got just 2. Now I've got 1 and 1, right? Flip it again, and then between this one and this one, right? Heads again, boom. All right, now we've made a decision. And that process, like if you have, let's say you have 256 choices to make, or 128 choices to make. 128 is 7 coin flips. 256, 8 coin flips. like you could be quite insane about this and have, I don't know, 65,000 something decisions to make, and you can get to a specific point anywhere between 0 and 65,000 something with 16 coin flips. So with a few flips, you can make a huge number of decisions. And the other is like something I use in particular is just use some code that generates random numbers, because you can be like, okay, I need to choose randomly between 1 and 12. Okay, set up a random number generator that generates a number between 1 and 12, and then act on that. Using theory, there's some great videos out there on the 4 chords of pop music, like the Axis of Awesome video. I'll try to actually pull that one in, and the Pachelbel rant that talk about like all of these songs out there. They don't talk about it explicitly in the sense that they're just showing you. They're playing many songs with the same 4 chords or the same underlying bass line. And it's kind of neat just to see just how many songs out there are using the same chord structure. And if you're trying to fit within that idiom, great. Use one of those 2 chord structures and make something awesome on top of it, because it's already going to connect with an audience to a certain extent, because they're going to intuitively feel that chord structure. The other some other fun videos out there are the 2 chords of every film score. There's a major chord and a minor chord and an interval between them, or a major chord and a major chord and an interval between them, and you can hear in some of these videos that they're like dozens upon dozens upon dozens of famous film scores that well that are really just made up of 2 chords playing back and forth, and then not necessarily like in the same exact time. Like there are some that are like dun, 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 right, and then the melody that fills in between. So like first you hear the chords and you're like, okay, that just sounds like 2 chords, sounds like classical music sort of. And then you hear the melody fill in between. You're like, oh, I know that one. It's Jurassic Park, or it's Star Wars, or something that's not John Williams. You'll hear it right away. So if you feel like you're getting stuck and you want to get a vibe across, look up the charts on what chord pairs, in terms of distance and voicing, relate to what vibe. And if you're like, okay, I want a heroic vibe, okay, there's chords for that. Oh, I want a demonic vibe, okay, there's chords for that. Go for it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, spending a lot of effort trying to get the pitches just right to get the vibe across, if those pitches have already kind of been tried out. That's the beauty of theory. Another approach to theory is not traditional classical music theory, but number theory, right? We talked very briefly in the sound video about the harmonic series and how that relates to kind of synthesis. Well, there's other numeric sequences that are kind of interesting. Like the harmonic series actually pretty closely relates to the major scale. I think Andrew Huang puts out a better video than I could spend time on right now illustrating that. I think I will actually try to pull that video into NYU Stream for you guys to check out if you'd like. The other famous number sequence is the Fibonacci series. That starts with 1, 1, then 2, then 3, then 5, then 8. What's the sign there? 8. Is 8 here? I'm dyslexic today. 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and so on and so forth. The pattern is you start with your starting point, 1 and 1, and then the next number is the sum of these 2. And then you take 2 and 1, you make 3. 3 and 2, you make 5, so on and so forth. That particular series is so strangely tied to nature and aesthetics that you can find all sorts of beautiful videos. I'll try to do maybe a sub video on this topic, because I think it's really interesting, because you can very quickly use it musically in terms of structuring time, in terms of structuring spectrum, structuring all sorts of things that suddenly have like this aesthetic that you didn't know you were into, but it's like right there in front of you. You're like, okay, I just put this series of numbers together and something cool happens. Awesome, that'll get you out of a break. And finally, the last number thing that I want to get into is fractals, or self-similar structures. So fractals are, you can kind of see self-similar structures in lots of kind of classical music, and you'll see it in like poetry and these sorts of things, where it's like, okay, you have an A, B, A. Well, then the whole structure goes, you know, a line might be A, B, A, or a rhyme scheme might be A, B, A. And then the structure of the whole poem might be like the A, B, A rhyme structure, the A, B rhyme structure, and then a B, C rhyme structure, and then an A, B, A rhyme structure. So you have one rhyme structure, the same rhyme structure, a new rhyme structure, and then the old rhyme structure again. This sort of fractal thing in music, because it's a little more abstract, you can go really far with it. So you could have a 3-note melody, you know, do, 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 and then go, okay, I'm going to take the first note, the first melody, I'm going to play it straight. Then I'm going to take the second one and I'm going to transpose it by the difference between the first note and the second note. All right, so now we wrote 3 notes, now we have 6 notes. Oh, I'm going to make the next section the same 3 notes, but transposed by the difference between the second note and the third note. Okay, so we wrote 3 notes, and then we're using a fractal process. Now we have 9 notes. Well, let's take that whole 9-note phrase, play it straight, then play it transposed by the first to second interval, then play it transposed by the second to third interval. So now we're at, oh, that's math, 27 notes. All right, do that again, and you know, you can see how very fast you go from I have 3 notes, they sound cool together, now they're modulated, and now we have like a huge mess of notes that create a melody that, even if it's somewhat arbitrary, there's something kind of intuitive about it that your brain goes, oh, that's cool. Like that relates, like even if it's subconscious, your brain is connecting these dots of like this pattern is similar to that pattern, and that's like aesthetically pleasing to us. And you know, you can still go in and post tweak it, you know, like, oh, okay, actually that one changes key and it kind of creates a different tone. I don't want it to change key. Okay, shift a couple notes and now suddenly you're in the same key, and it's fresh, cool, and fun. And you can do the same thing with time, right? You could do a fractal of long, long, short. Okay, same phrase, same phrase, same phrase, faster, right? And then do that again. So it's like long, long, short, long, long, short, 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 right? So suddenly you go from like, okay, I have like a 8th note ready, steady rhythm, getting kind of boring. Oh, okay, whoa, now it's 16th notes for just a little short time. Okay, now we play that whole thing, and it's 16th notes, and that's 32nd notes. It's like, ooh, okay. Suddenly I've got some weird patterns going on, and things are starting to swing against each other, because when it goes from 8th notes to 16th notes to 32nd notes, maybe I get a little swing pattern in there. You could just cut out that sweet part, turn that into a bass line, and now you have a cool idea you can then build upon, right? Whereas before, blank sheet, scary space, ooh, here's some ways to generate and get out of that blank space. So some alternate aesthetics. You know, within popular music, I'm thinking of things like weird, noisy, abstract introductions to songs that are otherwise just first chorus, verse songs that just kind of reset your expectation. Like you heard a song, you're going to hear a song again, but at the intro, we got something weird happening here that kind of jars you a little bit. I'm thinking of early 90s punk music. There was a lot of feedback intros where you just like, boom, and then jump right into the song. And that can be fun, like to play with that aesthetic for a minute, see if you can actually build something more than just an abstract introduction to a otherwise cool but ordinary song. What if you could extend that aesthetic and incorporate it more into the song in a way that was musically meaningful to you and exciting too? There's the hot mess outro is a name I give to the thing where like everyone just like plays all of the noises at once. There's like a bunch of like embellished kind of leads while the drummers, you know, it's just a big mess. Or like you have like additional weird recorded sounds in on top of the music. It's like that can be a kind of a cool climactic way to end a piece, but it could also be a cool way to have something happen in the middle of a piece. You know, maybe when you're using something that makes sense in an end of a piece in an older style of music could be reused in a new way in your music. And then one other alternate aesthetic that if you watch the YouTube comments of Aphex Twin shows, like people are like, where's the drop, man? Because he'll do the build and, you know, create some tension, and then he'll relieve it by going into another acoustic space, you know, without that super aggressive like bro step kind of drop stuff. He might do a build and then reverb wash it out and then come back down again and then be in a new groove without having that kind of aggressive kind of thing. And that could be interesting because that could inform like, oh, maybe I want to make chill step that changes into another aesthetic and then comes back to chill step. And you could kind of use that model instead of like the EDM bro step kind of like build right super aggressive thing. Outside of pop music, there's a piece called, I think it's Machine Metal Mayhem, that is entirely guitar feedback. It's like a 3-minute piece or something like this. There's just entirely guitar feedback. I can't remember if it was performed live or edited together, but it's out there. It's wild. Some other things that repetition. There's a famous artist, Steve Reich, and I think Terry Riley, both make works with taking a short fragment of music and repeating it, and then repeating it against itself in such a way that kind of new textures and melodies kind of come out. There was a piece called Piano Phase that was performed beautifully in Brooklyn a few years back, where you have the two pianists, they're playing the things, and up on stage in front of the pianist are two dancers that are turning and kind of like raising their arms as they're turning. They're kind of doing basic ballerina kind of moves, and they are lit in such a way that the two shadows of the dancers converge center stage up, and what you see is when they get in phase, the shadow becomes darker where they overlap, and there's a lighter shadow and a lighter shadow on the outside. And the cool thing is that that's what's happening when the music lines up, because sometimes they're repeating these simple figures, and they'll get together, and it'll just sound like parallel motion. It'll be like slightly less interesting. And then as they drift apart, instead of like hearing two pianists playing eighth notes against each other, you start hearing like 16th notes, and they're not like straight 16th notes. They're kind of swung 16th notes as you hear the two pianos playing against each other, and the dancer illustrates that in a beautiful way. Anyway, that kind of just builds on the idea of like repetition use in a way that's not like a standard loop, but a minimalist loop, and layering it. And another kind of like alternate aesthetic is different ways of structuring time. Like I was thinking about in film scores, like, you'll have a regular pulse in film scores, but they don't always follow that pulse exactly. Like the chord changes aren't always on the beat. It might be on the upbeat of the third beat in the measure, and that suddenly changes the phrasing a little bit and gets your attention, and then it kind of slides away from your attention as you're paying attention to something on screen, and then they mix it up and it gets your attention again, right? You can play with that in music too. You can do things that are like out of predictable time. Like I was thinking of some people will do like a build to a drop, and it'll be like 32 bar build, 32 bar build, 16 bar drop, and it's like bam, right in lock time. Well, some people like when they, when you get to the top of the build and you need to create a little bit of space so that the drop is sonically separate enough from the build that you feel the impact of the drop. Playing with silence or changing the spectrum a lot will do that trick. In Scary Monsters, you have the pyramid build where it's like layer, 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 a little bit of riser build, and then yes, oh my god, like totally different sound spectrum, and then wow, into the drop. You can end your fills early, insert the cut away the vocal part, and then come to the drop, or you can insert like a couple of bars arbitrarily. So it's like, build, 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 build. The drop should be, the next beat should be here, but you put in an additional fill of a couple notes or a bar or something like that, and then the drop here, which really kind of plays with tension and release. There's a classical composer, Mozart, who was famous for that. He would create tension that would be relieved by going back to the tonic chord, but he wouldn't go there. He would go to the dominant, and then you'd be like, okay, and then he would build up the tension again that was going to be resolved by going back to the tonic, and then he wouldn't do that. He would start to move towards the tonic and then embellish again to move on to another section before resolving. So the whole time you're like, and then it doesn't resolve, and it doesn't resolve. And he was kind of an artist in the sense that he played with that tension consciously. Like a lot of us, myself at least, I will accidentally build tension, especially if I'm improvising. I will accidentally build tension and not realize that I should really be relieving that tension soonish. Otherwise, I'm just like arbitrarily sliding up in register and making people's ears go. So if I know I'm playing with, if I'm aware of, oh, I've made some tension here, let's relieve it a little bit, but not all the way, because I want to still build that tension. That's something you can play with that will get you out of maybe a rut or out of working in the same aesthetic over and over again. And it can be fun. So some things you can do with time warping. I love trying to get melodic ideas um, out of simple ideas. So like if I make a bass line, I'm like, oh, that's good. Well, now I need a top line of something that counters that bass line. Well, what if I just speed up the bass line, make it play double? It's like, oh, okay, now my chord changes don't quite line up, but that's kind of cool. Let's take that and like stretch another part of it out, slow down this little section of it. Okay, now they do line up. Oh, now I have a nice counter melody. Like I start on C here, but now let's start on C there, but the bass line might be going up, and now the melody is going down over 3 notes while the bass line's going up over 2 notes. And suddenly, without having to really write from scratch a new melody, by playing with speeding up and slowing down of fragments of a melody, I've created something new that relates very strongly back to the original idea at the kind of the root of the musical concept. Another approach is I just take that thing and spin it around, right? If I take a musical fragment that's interesting to me and I've played it 3 times in a row, and now on the 4th one I really want to make something different to kind of keep interest going, well, I take the same thing and I spin it. Maybe it's a 4-note, 5-note pattern. I spin it around backwards. And now instead of starting on the tonic and landing on the dominant, I started on the dominant and landed on the tonic. Well, that might not loop back to the beginning or just right. So I make a few edits and shift that last note being on the tonic maybe to the subdominant, and create a little bit of a tension as it goes back to the downbeat. And so you play A, and then B, and now B makes it so you want to hear A again. Boom, we come back to A, and now it's exciting, right? And we've done this without spending a ton of time trying to craft a nice little fill. I just spun it, changed 2 notes, boom, I have something interesting all of a sudden. Another thing you can do that's kind of wild and crazy is just smash the time signature. And I loved something that the Ramones would do. They just have these like straight 16th note, like they'd be playing 4/4, and then they do 1 bar of 2/4, right? In every phrase or something like that, and it would just kind of break up your expectation of like, oh, it's just going to be like the same note. Your brain will eventually go, that's cool. Okay, yeah, that's repetitive. But they would insert that little phrase that would kind of refresh you, right? So, okay, cool. Your brain's, it's still pretty simple, but your brain is excited by it just a little bit more than it would be if they played straight 16th notes the entire time. So, what else can we do? Let's play with time a little bit more. We could make something every day. What could you make every day? Like there's an artist out there, Jonathan Mann. He makes a song every day. He's made a song every day since 2009, like January 2009. He has a Guinness Book of World Records award. I think it was when he hit 4,000 songs, but I can't remember the exact date. He's made so many songs that he is now a world record holder in the number of songs he's made. But you don't have to think about songs per se. You could, like, what if you made a drop every day, or a riser every day, or a beat every day? Pretty soon you would have a huge collection of beats and risers and drops. So like when you're working on a project, you're like, oh, I need a drop. Okay, I got 50 of them. Great. Well, we're in the key of E. Great. Let's grab a drop from the key of E. Bam, in. Now we're making music fast, right? Because we have the content, we have the materials, and also the skills that you develop by making those drops every day. Whoo, man, you're going to be crushing it. Some short time games that are really fun. I think Adam makes a really cool game where he does a variation on Exquisite Corpse. So you spend 15 minutes making anything musical, any sound in your DAW. Then you print it as audio, whatever that thing is. Maybe it's a 1-minute segment. Maybe it's just a sound, whatever it is. But you take that little bit of audio and you hand it to the next producer. That person plays with it for 15 minutes, then hands it to the next producer. Meanwhile, when you hand off your chunk of audio, someone else hands you their chunk of audio, and pretty soon, like, let's say there's 10 of you, you've passed, everyone has passed a musical idea around the room for 10 people or something like this, um, and everyone started with an idea. Everyone's contributed. Now you have 10 short musical pieces that each of you, if each 10 times 15, so you spend 150 minutes, like 2.5 hours, and the group of you has potentially 10 songs or 10 musical awesome pieces, right, in 2.5 hours, right? There's a short time commitment. You might not be super inspired, during that, but pretty soon you're going to start getting new ideas and playing with things, and being able to do things quickly is kind of awesome because it ups your game a bit, develops those skills, makes it so when you're working on a song of your own and you're like, oh shoot, I've got to go to this meeting, I've got a rehearsal to go to or something like that. Well, I've got 15 minutes. Let's make something cool to add to this song in 15 minutes. Let's go, let's do it. So building on that is the concept of Pomodoro. That is, I think it's Italian for tomato, and it's based on these old kitchen timers from Italy that they looked like a tomato. And the idea is that you set your timer for an arbitrary number of time. I think they figured out like 25 minutes was a magic number for business. For music, it might not be that particular time chunk. But you set the timer, and you work diligently on whatever task you're up against for 15-20 minutes. Then you take a 5-minute break. Just kind of chill. Maybe that's when you do your social media or your something like this. I wouldn't recommend social media because especially not right now. But you do something that is fun to you. Maybe it's take a run around the block, or maybe it's like kick the ball with the neighbors or something like this. But you do something fun for just 5 minutes, like a really short break, and then you go do another 25-minute session, and then you do 4 of these over the course of 2.5, 3 hours, and then you take a longer break, like half an hour or something like this. And people have found that when they set short, like focused goals, they can really kind of crush through a project versus like you're like, I've got 4 hours. What are you going to do in 4 hours if you spend the first half an hour kind of just daydreaming? Then you spend the second half an hour, instead of working, you're kind of allowing yourself to be distracted because you're daydreaming, so it's easier to kind of like, oh, what about this? I wonder what Amanda's doing. Oh, let's text her. Like suddenly you're not crushing your project, you're allowing all of the distracting thoughts, especially politics and environmental concerns and these things into your head at a time when that's not what you want to be doing right now. So you give yourself a small chunk of time, you do the cool thing, but then you also reward yourself with something fun, so that you're telling the part of your brain that has to work really hard to focus can get burned out really quick. And if you're the kind of person who's like, oh, you're just going to work hard all the time, versus if you work hard for a little bit, take a break, you're telling that part of your brain, I know you need to take a break, and you're cool. Love it when you work hard. We're going to take a break. It's going to be awesome. And then you come back refreshed, and you can do the next thing with focus and persistence and just crush it. The last thing in this section of the idea of time is the concept of 10,000 hours. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell made this concept famous in his book Outliers, where he talked about people who have had the opportunity to put in 10,000 hours in any given awesome thing. So like he called out like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, who were at the right age to develop code skills and these sorts of things, and they put in their 10,000 hours before they really started their businesses. So they were already potentially leaders in the field when they got to the point where it's like, we got to do a business, right? I think it's like Phineas even has this like etched in his childhood home's wall, and he has like a neon sign version of this in his current apartment, because that is part of what made those projects, the projects he did with his sister, so compelling, is that they really have put in those hours. They've really put in the rehearsal time. They've put in the compositional time. They have that background in choir training from before they were making pop music, where all of those skills and experiences accumulated into being able to put together something really compelling for all of us to enjoy. Really, some of us anyway. So the idea is, if you can put together 10,000 hours of focused work at any specific thing, you will be the awesome person at that specific thing. And it's very likely that you will be able to get into places where you charge for doing that specific thing. And if it's music making, awesome. If it's coding, excellent. If it's writing, whatever it is that you want to do, that you're going to put in those hours. Because if you take those Pomodoro techniques, the working on a chunk of time, focusedly, not just like I'm sitting at my studio for an hour, but like focusedly for an hour, maybe with 5 minutes breaks in there, but those hours add up. What do you call it? In interest, we call it, it's a compound interest thing. So if you are at level 1 on day 1 and you do, you get yourself to level 2, and then, bam, at the end of day 1 you're at level 2. Okay, I've made one step forward. I'm from level 1 to level 2. Well, on day, the next day, you're like, okay, I'm already at level 2. I had another one at level 3. And then eventually you're not just making one level up per day. Maybe you're making 2, and then you get enough skills, you're making 3, right? I think the idea is like, 1 times 1.5. So 1 times 1.5, 1.5. Okay, so I'm at 1.5 times 1.5. Now we're at, I can't do math in my head, sorry. But if you increase by 50% every day, or every week, or every month, over the course of years, you are so much further than you could have been without those steps, right? Because each time you develop a skill, like, oh, this month I'm learning music keys. Great. Now if you already know sound and you learned music keys, a month from now you're working with sound and music keys. Well, great. What about working with songwriting? Okay, you spend 6 months working on rhyme schemes and lyric development and stuff like that. Now you have sounds, keys, and rhyme schemes. Great. Now you can be a lyricist and a composer. Crazy, right? Eventually, if you accumulate enough of this stuff, you become the best person at that thing. And presumably, you are capable of being very efficient at it, so that if someone hires you to write a song, it doesn't take you 6 months, it takes you 6 hours, right? To draft it, and then maybe to produce it 6 days, right? So suddenly, let's say you're offered, let's say arbitrarily $1,000 to produce a song for an online video series, right? If you can knock that out in a week, that's a good pay, especially if you could line up like 3 or 4 of those in a month. You'd be able to pay the bills. If it takes you 1.5 years to do a gig that earns you $1,000, that's a lot of hours and not a lot of money. While if you're not making anything, $1,000 is more than nothing. It would be better if you could crush it kind of efficiently. So again, lots of hours, focused, making something every day, playing games to keep you focused for a short amount of time. All of that can accumulate so that you develop a little bit of skill every day until suddenly you have a lot of skill and you are exactly where you want to be. So, some project ideas you could play with. I don't know, I'm going to skip that. So, creative mindset. Something is better than nothing. Anything is better than nothing. Going from 0 to 1 is like an infinite scale, right? Like 0 times infinity is technically 0, but 0 times what is 1? What times 0 is 1? I don't know. It's an imaginary number. It's so profound. From 1 to 2, that's just, plus 1. That's an incremental change. Like the first smartphone was such a huge leap in what was available. The next version is just improving on something that already exists. But for something to exist, that's where the really cool stuff happens. Making something, once it's something, even if it's something that's not very good. I mean, like the iPhone 1 was not wonderful. When you looked at websites, it was like slow. There were all sorts of challenges. It didn't process very fast. This thing is more powerful than what we use to get people to the moon. Like these more recent smartphones are ridiculous. Like this one's literally faster than the computer I used to record my first album. Probably faster. Like it's embarrassing to think about that. So once something exists, you can make it better. You can polish it. If you remember episode, I think it was 113 of Mythbusters, it's the one where they literally polished poop. They took poop and compressed it really hard and then put a shine on it. So like while I say, you can't polish turd, it's like, well, technically you can, at least from that literal interpretation. But if there is nothing, what can you polish? You can't polish nothingness. Something has to exist before you can put a polish on it. Another creative mindset idea that is widely misattributed to a semi-alcoholic author of, I think his name was Ernest Hemingway. He wrote several books in the 20th century that were awesomely successful, and you should probably read a couple of them if you get a chance. But the idea is still kind of valuable. The idea of write drunk, edit sober is write in the zone. Get into a flow state where you're not self-critical and you're not getting your own way. You're just going. Go, 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 go. Get the idea out. Get the vibe across. Get it, whatever it is you're doing. Just go with it. Then, when you get to a certain point, you have something now. And if it needs editing, great. Go in there and edit it with that kind of clinical mindset. Like, you can be critical now because something exists, right? If you let your critic in before it exists, your critic will probably just prevent you from making anything. Like, if you've ever been like just sitting in front of a blank screen and been like, oh yeah, I'm going to make this song. And it's like you enter 2 notes and your critic goes, ah, that's dumb. You delete the 2 notes. Now you're blank again. Bummer, right? Whereas if you make a bunch of stuff somehow, even if it's not great, maybe something in there, maybe a fragment, a tiny percentage of what you've done is cool. And you can put that out, take it, edit it, do stuff with it, put some polish on it, and make something cool, right? But if you let your critic in, not going to happen. If you work, then let your critic in, once something exists, you have the opportunity to make it happen. So, your creative family. Who have you worked with, musically or otherwise, where the work becomes fun, where the experience is constructive, where you move forward, you enjoy working together, and you don't distract from each other or take away the mojo of your creative inputs. You know, what is it that that person is doing when you're feeling that way? What are you doing that makes the synergy grow, right? Like, where the efforts of 2 people suddenly multiply and it becomes more than the efforts of 2 people. It feels like the efforts of 3 or 4 people because your time is used well. You're not bickering or criticizing each other. You're like collaborating. You're really like kind of going like, oh, that's a cool idea. What about this? And you add something to it, and they're like, oh, that's great, and they add something to that, and suddenly all of these great ideas accumulate, and you have something cool in your hands. Like you have a finished product, whatever that might be. Like whether it's a book or a essay or a song or an album, whatever it might be. Who and how does that energy build, and what can you do to foster that, right? Because I'm sure there are people who are the opposite you've worked with, right? Who like are constantly like Debbie Downers, like, oh, I don't know, I don't like bass lines, right? You don't want to work with those folks. You want to find the people who make you better, and you want to be that person who makes other people better, right? Because then magic things happen. And speaking of people who make things better, like who inspires you? What artists do you want to be like, right? Do you know that? I think a lot of you have kind of written at least an essay that we read where you mentioned 3 artists, but who else? Who else do you want to be like? And when you put them together, does it make something new? Especially like if I mean, this is a ridiculous kind of connection, but like if you liked a country artist and you liked dubstep, could you make country dubstep, right? Like would line dancing and bass drops like work? Is there a place for that? I'm not sure, but you know, the idea of taking lots of inspirations from lots of different people and putting it together is like super valuable. So identifying those inspirations is something that I hope to be doing every day, and I hope you do as well. And finally, in this section, if you produced a track and someone was like, oh man, that totally reminds me of X, whatever X is, are you producing things where they say that name and you're like, yes, that's one of my inspirations? Or they sang a name that is like the anti-inspiration? And what can you think about to do to get more aligned with what you want to inspire, right? Or you want people to identify your work with certain inspirations. You know, this might be a production question. It might be just a inspiration question. You're in place A now, right? You are at a certain level of skill with your skills, and you want to be to a new level of skills. Now, one thing that's very important, and I've heard a lot about research and social media creating challenges psychologically and emotionally for folks, is that they compare their self now with with someone else and where they are now, which is kind of not relevant. Because what's only truly relevant is where you are now and where you are tomorrow or the next day or the next day, right? Because that's the thing that, one, you can control and contribute to, but two, that's the thing that's relevant, right? If you are in the same exact place that you were today in a month, what have you done, right? Are you, musically better? Are you happier? Whatever it is, if you can make that a linear progression in some way from here to at least moving in the direction of where you want to be, or if you think about the opposite of that, moving away from where you don't want to be, right? Because like if you pursue a certain course of action and you can see right away, oh, that's going to land me in jail, or that's going to land me in some place I don't want to be. Great, don't pursue that action. Pursue anything other than that. Pursue the opposite of that. If you're like, oh, that would get me in trouble, so do something else. Do something cooler, right? You can go in any direction you want to go. Why don't you go towards the direction you want to go and away from the direction you don't want to go? I'm pretty sure if you can kind of master those steps and keep on going for 10,000 hours. And for context, I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have put in somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 hours already. Probably just in music creation, because what is 1,000 hours? If you are playing with music, let's say 10 hours a week. I know you're doing more than that, but let's just say for mathematical simplicity, 10 hours a week. You have 52 weeks a year. Let's say for 50 of those weeks, you're putting in 10 hours. Well, that's 500 hours in 1 year. If you've been working on this cool stuff for 4 years, you're at about 2,000 hours. At that rate, you would, 4 years for 2,000. So in 20 years, you would be incredible, right? So what if you up that to 20 hours a week, right? And I think that's getting closer to where a lot of you are. So if you're averaging 20 hours a week, so that means 1 week you might just crush it. You might be like putting in a crazy amount of time. Another week, family's in town, you got to slow down the production a little bit. It's fine. But if you're averaging 20 hours a week, you're at 1,000 hours a year easily, right? So that's like in 10 years, you're incredible. If you could manage it to average 40 hours a week for 5 years, you're at 10,000 hours. You are at the pinnacle of what most professionals achieve, right? You have all the skills to be professional. You've probably developed all the production skills, the creative skills, the intercollaboration skills, and even a fair amount of the business skills to be successful if that's what you choose to do. So I guess it's really just a matter of how do you want to use your time, and can you approach a mindset where you're using your time well and moving forward in that productive way. So last one I want to kind of get to is think big, set wildly audacious goals, but keep them abstract a little bit, because every day that you're not at that goal, you kind of be, I won't beat that goal, man. I'm not there yet. Oh, it kind of sucks, right? But if every day you're taking a step towards that goal, oh man, you're gonna get there, right? The old, what is it? Proverb is a journey of 1,000 kilometers starts with 1 step, right? If you want to make that journey, you gotta start walking. And if you can eventually start walking, grab a bicycle, start moving. Eventually you get your license, you get yourself a car. Now you're really moving, right? Eventually you drive that car to the airport. You're flying, right? If you can keep going in that direction, stay focused on the process. Oh man, you are going to crush it. You're going to go beyond all of us if you can keep on going. And as that goal may shift, like people I know that started in music production, liked working with computers, liked the creativity of computers, suddenly started learning coding. They got really creative. Ooh, man, they have amazing careers now in coding, right? They're not necessarily doing music. Some of them are, some of them are not, but they're so stoked to be able doing the thing they want to do. They don't have a day job and then like they do stuff creative stuff for fun on the side. The creative stuff is their day job. That's what they're doing. It's awesome. But they made progress every day. And while they had this huge goal, oh yeah, I'm going to be a famous producer, and then suddenly I'm going to be like a successful coder. But the steps, the focusing on those little steps, and making the changes when you need to. So you don't, if you realize that what you really want is creativity, and you're finding this other aspect of music gives you more creativity, and that's what's exciting to you, that's what motivates you and gets you going in the morning, then maybe that's the change you need to make. Or maybe you've painted yourself in a corner and you're like, this no, this is not the goal I want to go towards. Some people find themselves in the music industry and are like, I don't like the music industry. I don't like the hours. I don't like the people always trying to take, like a percentage of my gross, and like, oh, we'll do this record deal for you, but we're going to own all the rights to it, so you don't actually make any money from it. We'll make the money. You have all the creative risk. We have no creative risk. We just have some financial risk, and you might find yourself having to leave that context in order to pursue the goal that you truly want to pursue. As you get to a place, I was just thinking of, from my view, I can see the top of the foothills. If I walk to the top of that mountain, suddenly I have a new perspective, and I can see a much higher mountain just another 10 miles away. And if I want to get to the highest place in my immediate proximity, I might actually have to go uphill and then downhill a little bit and then back uphill to get to where I really want to go, right? So sometimes you're pursuing your goal, but you have to be flexible enough to know that not every day is going to be going direct towards the goal. Maybe I have to go down another path that takes me downhill for a little bit before I can get to the top of the real peak. So with that, there's a lot of philosophical kind of stuff. Sorry that went a bit long, but hopefully you can take little fragments of that and put it to good use in your music mindset, your creative mindset, like how you get from nothing to something and then to something awesome. So I'll let you go with that. All right, see you next time. Thanks.